General Hospital spoiler reveal that the verdict in the case that had consumed Port Charles finally arrived like a tremor ripping across the foundation of every family tied to the shooting of Drew Kane. When the judge declared Willow Tate Kane officially not guilty, the courtroom released a wave of shock, relief, and confusion that refused to settle. Willow, pale and trembling, was caught between the salvation of freedom and the crushing weight of everything. She had endured accusations, lost memories, the haunting possibility that she might have harmed someone she once cared about. Chase had held on to the belief of her innocence so fiercely that the verdict felt like his personal vindication, but he barely allowed himself a breath of triumph, because the moment the gavel dropped, a new storm began forming, one far more volatile than the one they had just survived. Chase had already turned his focus toward Dante and Turner, urging them to reopen the investigation with a new target in mind, Michael Corinthos. For months, suspicion had hovered over the edges of the case, ignored or minimized because of family loyalties, emotional bias, or the chaos of conflicting witness accounts. Chase saw the gaps, the inconsistencies, the things that had never sat right with him. But the difference now was that Dante, who had tried desperately to remain objective, was beginning to see those same cracks and wonder whether he had been protecting the wrong person all along. As the first waves of celebration murmured through Port Charles at Willow's acquittal, Chase turned the spotlight on Michael with an intensity that threatened to upend years of complicated relationships and unspoken history. What disturbed Dante most was how quickly the evidence shifted. Once Willow's innocence was reaffirmed, the shell casings, the timing of Michael's unexplained disappearance that night, the testimonies that suddenly made more sense when interpreted through a different lens. Each piece began aligning in a way that Dante could no longer ignore. It felt as though the truth had been hiding behind a veil that only lifted when Willow walked free. Chase, who had been dismissed as emotional and irrational for defending her, now carried a sense of grim determination. He wasn't driven by resentment, but by the overwhelming need to correct the narrative that had nearly destroyed Willow. And yet, beneath that determination, a more subtle fear took root, the fear that he had allowed his personal feelings to cloud his judgment for too long, and that if he didn't push now, the real shooter would slip through the cracks forever. Dante was torn between duty and dread. Each step he took toward Michael felt like a betrayal of the Corinthos family he had grown up beside, one that had sheltered him, supported him, and claimed him as their own. But the more he reviewed the evidence, the more he recognized the uncomfortable truth. If anyone else had produced the same suspicious behavior Michael did, Dante would have arrested them without hesitation. The realization carved a deep wound into him, leaving him questioning not only his professionalism, but the emotional bias he claimed he never allowed to interfere with his work. Turner, newer to the dynamic and free from personal ties, became the grounding force of the investigation. He brought a cold, unbiased sharpness to the case that neither Dante nor Chase possessed. Where Chase was fueled by passion and Dante was tangled in family loyalty, Turner saw only facts, and the facts were slowly forming a path that led straight to Michael. The more Turner dug, the more he found subtle but damning patterns that cast Michael in the role of orchestrator rather than victim. Meanwhile, Willow found no peace in her acquittal. The relief that should have washed over her instead collapsed into a deeper panic. As the fragments of her memories resurfaced, chaotic flashes of fear, pain, and running footsteps blurred with emotional confusion. She wanted desperately to cling to the verdict, to believe she had not pulled the trigger, but the possibility that Michael was being drawn into the investigation because of her weighed on her like a punishment she couldn't escape. She knew Michael had gone to dangerous lengths to protect their family before. She also knew he was capable of crossing moral lines if he believed it was necessary. The idea that he might have taken matters into his own hands that night terrified her, as much as the thought that she might have done it herself. Brook Lynn, however, saw everything differently. Watching her husband plunge deeper into the investigation with a near-manic intensity unsettled her to the core. She admired Chase's loyalty, but she feared the emotional toll that chasing the truth could take on him, especially if it led him down a path that risked destroying the fragile peace within her own family. Every argument between them spiraled back to Willow, Michael, or the shooting itself, pulling them further from the stability they had worked to build. She tried to stay neutral, but neutrality became impossible once she learned that Chase was pushing Dante to pursue Michael. Even before the ink had dried on Willow's acquittal, Brook Lynn saw it as a betrayal, a reckless obsession with proving himself right, no matter the cost. The ripple effects began spreading through Port Charles. Carly watched the growing tension with a quiet dread, sensing the storm that could swallow her son whole. Sonny, though absent from the legal process, felt the strain building like the tightening of a knot around the Corinthos family, and Michael, caught between his desire to protect Willow and the mounting suspicion closing in, could feel the walls narrowing around him. The more Dante pursued him, the more erratic Michael's behavior became. Every question seemed to hit too close to the truth. Every alibi he offered sounded more rehearsed, and every moment he spent trying to act normal only deepened the impression that he was hiding something. The investigation intensified when Turner discovered a piece of evidence that had gone unnoticed the first time, a surveillance disruption that coincided precisely with the moment Drew was shot. A disruption traced back to a signal originating from Michael's location. It wasn't proof, but it was the first unmistakable footprint pointing in his direction. Dante collapsed inside when he heard the report. Chase hardened. Turner prepared to dig even deeper, and Willow felt her world spin again, realizing that the nightmare she thought had ended was only beginning. Because if Michael had pulled that trigger, everything she believed about loyalty, sacrifice, and love would be shattered. The truth was spiraling toward them with unstoppable momentum. What none of them knew yet was whether the truth would save them, or destroy everything they wanted to protect. And as Chase pushed the investigation forward, determined to uncover what really happened, he sensed something far darker waiting on the other side of the revelation, something that could change not only the case, but the entire fabric of Port Charles forever. The larger and far more terrifying question hanging over the investigation is what Chase will do. If the truth finally claws its way to the surface and exposes that Willow was the one who pulled the trigger on Drew all along, such a revelation wouldn't just shatter the case, it would collapse Chase from the inside out. Every instinct he clung to, every argument he made in her defense, every heated moment where he insisted Dante was wrong, would be reduced to nothing more than the remnants of a delusion he built out of affection. It would mean his so-called clarity had been nothing but emotional fog, and that he had allowed the woman he once loved to blur his judgment until he could no longer distinguish fact from hope. Chase would be forced to confront the possibility that he had been protecting a lie, nurturing it, feeding it, believing in it with the blind devotion of someone who refused to let go of the past. And if that truth hit him, it would hit hard enough to make him question whether he deserved to wear a badge at all. The identity of the shooter could become the breaking point that redefines the detective he thought he was, the man he believed he had grown into, and the emotional vulnerabilities he fought so long to bury. It would be almost unbearable for him to admit that the same heart he thought he had trained to stay out of police work had quietly been hijacking his choices from the start. But the consequences wouldn't stop with Chase. It would also change the way Dante looks at him, deeply, permanently, maybe irreparably. Dante is already carrying the strain of suspecting his own brother, a burden heavy enough to fracture his sense of right and wrong. If he learns that Chase has been driving him toward Michael not because of evidence, but because he refused to see the truth about Willow, that betrayal could slice through years of friendship, trust, and partnership. Dante prides himself on being fair, on being the man who does not turn away from truth even when it hurts. So learning that Chase might have manipulated his direction would feel like a knife in the back. He would begin questioning every decision Chase has made recently, wondering whether the badge on his chest was guiding him or whether his unresolved love for Willow was the true compass. Should Willow be exposed as the shooter while Chase continues pressuring Dante to pursue Michael, it would paint Chase as a man blinded by emotion, loyalties, and regrets, a man incapable of recognizing the danger right in front of him. Their partnership, once built on mutual trust, would unravel thread by thread under the strain of suspicion, guilt, and unspoken resentment. And while Chase's world threatens to come apart professionally and emotionally, Brook Lynn stands in the center of her own storm, one she neither caused nor asked for, but which has steadily grown until it saturates every corner of her marriage. When she first learned from Dante that Chase had been working as a part-time detective for Willow, despite being off duty, she felt a sharp sting of betrayal that lodged beneath her ribs like a splinter. It wasn't just the secrecy, it was what it implied. She had fought for their marriage, poured herself into building something stable, rebuilding trust step by step, only to discover that Chase's loyalty seemed to drift toward Willow whenever pressure mounted. At first she tried to dismiss it, tried to tell herself it was just Chase being who he was, protective, honorable, overly empathetic, but the truth lingered like a bruise that refused to fade. She wanted him to let the legal system run its course, to accept that neither she nor Chase could control the outcome. Yet each conversation brought them back to the same battle line, Michael or Willow. Every argument became a tug-of-war between Brook Lynn's instinct to keep their marriage safe and Chase's inability to detach his emotions from his reasoning. When Chase leaned toward Michael being the shooter, Brook Lynn pushed back, urging caution, reminding him that the case was not as clear as he insisted. But the more she pushed, the more determined Chase became, and the more determined he became, the more she felt herself slipping into a frightening realization. Her husband was no longer fighting for justice, he was fighting for Willow. And once that thought took shape, it refused to let go. Even so, Brook Lynn forced herself to forgive him, at least temporarily. She tried to push past the sting of knowing Chase had been prioritizing Willow in ways he never admitted aloud. She hoped the case would finally close so they could return to the quiet life they were trying to build, but the case only grew darker, more twisted, and more explosive. What she does not yet know, what Chase has not confessed, is that he has been urging Dante to focus on Michael long before Willow's verdict was finalized. If Brook Lynn were to discover this, the fracture lines already forming in their marriage would instantly deepen. It would no longer be a matter of professional disagreement. It would become a question of emotional fidelity and trust. She would see it not as a lapse in judgment, but as a confession he never spoke. That Willow still occupies a space inside him larger than he is willing to admit. That truth would be unbearable, and once known, it would change the entire rhythm of their relationship. The pressure builds around them like a tightening noose. Chase becomes increasingly obsessed with proving he was right, pushing harder on Dante, ignoring the emotional minefield he is dragging them all through. Dante struggles beneath the weight of investigating his own brother while battling the fear that he has been manipulated into hunting the wrong person. Brook Lynn feels herself drowning in doubts she cannot voice without risking everything she loves. And Willow, walking freely after the verdict, carries her own shadows, unaware that the truth could detonate her life in ways far worse than prison ever could. The deeper Chase buries himself in the investigation, the more his identity begins to fracture. If Willow is innocent, he wants to be proven right. But if she is guilty, he will have to face the possibility that he has lost control not just of the case, but of himself. He is caught between the man he wants to be and the man his heart keeps pulling him back toward. And the more that internal war intensifies, the further he drifts from Brook Lynn, who feels as if she is losing her husband to a ghost of the past she thought she had finally defeated. Their marriage becomes a silent battlefield, each unresolved argument another scar neither of them wants to acknowledge. Brook Lynn feels the cold shadow of doubt every time Chase defends Willow too quickly, every time he dismisses Michael too eagerly, every time he insists that his instincts are infallible. That doubt grows into fear that Chase is not just protecting Willow out of justice, but out of love. And once fear turns into suspicion, the marriage they built so carefully begins to crumble. What neither of them can see clearly yet is that this case is no longer about bullets, suspects, or evidence. It has become a mirror reflecting everything they don't want to face, everything they don't want to admit, everything they don't want to lose. And with every step Chase takes toward exposing a truth he may not be ready to confront, he risks tearing apart the partnership he has with Dante, the marriage he has with Brook Lynn, and the identity he has built for himself. The investigation has become an obsession. The truth is circling closer. The emotions beneath the surface are sharpening into weapons. And the moment the real shooter is revealed, whether it is Michael, Willow, or someone no one expects, the cost will be far greater than anyone is prepared to pay. For Chase, the truth could save him or destroy everything he still hopes to protect. The turning point arrives with a brutality no one in Port Charles is prepared for. When Michael and Brook Lynn uncover the truth Chase has spent months refusing to see. Willow was the one who shot Drew. It is not a rumor, not a suspicion, not a twisted reinterpretation of shadows and half-memories this time. The truth comes in the form of evidence so undeniable that even Michael, who has spent his life protecting Willow, feels the floor drop beneath him. Brook Lynn is the first to feel the nauseating weight of the revelation, because she instantly understands what it means not just for the case, not just for Willow, but for her marriage. Chase's blind, almost desperate loyalty to Willow has been the quiet poison spreading through every corner of their relationship, and now that the truth has surfaced, that poison begins to take its final, irreversible shape. Michael spirals into disbelief, torn between rage and heartbreak, unable to understand how Willow could have hidden such a devastating truth from him. But Brook Lynn's reaction is different. Hers is the numb, cold realization that the man she married has been defending the true shooter with such fervor, that he has endangered not only his career but his integrity, his judgment, and the fragile bond they've worked so hard to build. The truth hits her with a sharp, merciless precision. Chase was never fighting for justice. He was fighting for Willow. And now the consequences of that devotion are coming home to destroy him. Chase, meanwhile, remains trapped in the last stages of denial, so consumed by the obsession of proving Willow innocent that he cannot see the collapse happening around him. The harder he pushes, the further he spirals, and the more he alienates the people trying to pull him back to reality. Dante watches helplessly as his former partner sinks deeper into a delusion. He no longer has the strength or the clarity to escape. The PCPD, already wary after Chase's erratic behavior during the investigation, quietly begins distancing itself from him. It is not formal yet, not official, but the message is unmistakable. Chase will never wear the badge again. His career, once full of promise and respect, is now a casualty of his inability to separate his heart from his duty. The tragedy of it all is that Chase cannot see the walls closing in. He continues insisting that Michael is guilty, even when the evidence begins pointing in the opposite direction. He continues fighting for Willow long after she has stopped fighting for herself. And he continues believing that love is love, his loyalty, his unshakable faith can rewrite the truth. But it cannot. It never could. And when Michael finally confronts him with the evidence, the last fragile thread holding Chase's conviction snaps. The collapse is instant and devastating. His entire world, every belief he clung to, every choice he made in Willow's defense, turns to dust in his hands. Brook Lynn watches this unraveling with a pain that is deeper than anger. What hurts her most is not that Chase was wrong, it is that he refused to see her, hear her, or trust her as his partner. He trusted Willow more than he trusted his own wife. And that betrayal, emotional, psychological, and unforgivable, becomes the final blow she can no longer ignore. She realizes that their marriage has reached a point where love is no longer enough to save it. Chase's obsession has consumed their home, their peace, their future. And now the truth about Willow becomes the final confirmation of what Brook Lynn has been trying so desperately not to admit. She has to leave him. The decision is heartbreaking, but necessary. Her heart breaks for the man Chase used to be, the man she married, the man she fought to believe in. But the man standing before her now is a stranger, frantic, lost, drowning in guilt and obsession. Her choice becomes the catalyst for the next disaster. The moment she tells Chase she wants a divorce, he shatters. Completely, irreversibly. What was once obsession transforms into something darker, heavier, more consuming. Chase becomes haunted by the double betrayal, Willow's hidden guilt and Brook Lynn's departure. He had built his identity around defending innocence, protecting love, and believing in people even when others refused. But now that belief has destroyed everything he valued. His marriage is gone. His career is gone. His sense of self is gone. And as the truth spreads across Port Charles, the fallout becomes a new disaster, one no one knows how to contain. Michael struggles with the emotional wreckage Willow has thrust upon him. Brook Lynn tries to hold herself together while watching the man she once loved crumble. Dante is left grappling with guilt over whether he should have stepped in sooner. And Chase, broken in ways deeper than anyone can see, begins walking through Port Charles, like someone trapped between who he was and who he has become, a ghost made of regret, heartbreak, and the unbearable weight of a truth he can never escape. The revelation of Willow's guilt does not merely close the case. It detonates a chain reaction of emotional destruction that threatens to swallow everyone connected to it. And in the center of that devastation stands Chase alone, shattered and consumed by an obsession that has cost him everything. The nightmare is no longer the shooting. The nightmare is what the truth has revealed about all of them. And the question that now hangs over Port Charles is no longer who shot Drew, but who will survive what the truth has done.